Every national forest has a boundary the public can see. The real boundary lies farther in, where radio signals break apart, and the trail stops matching the map. Tonight, you will hear 10 accounts from rangers, researchers, and wilderness workers, from frozen northern lakes and Appalachian gorges to Alaska rainforests and desert caves. Some encounters grew out of local warnings. Others were recorded in reports that offered ordinary explanations for impossible details. These stories come from witness accounts, with names and details changed. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Then stay close to the trail. Story 1. Nora Vance reached the LaCroix district warehouse before daylight. The coffee in the break room had been sitting long enough to leave a brown ring around the glass pot. She poured it anyway, then carried the cup to the gear bench and began checking her load. Map case, compass, radio, first aid kit, spare wool gloves, crosscut saw, sight condition forms sealed in a plastic bag. Her route began at the Moose River North entry point. She would inspect the campsites on Nina Moose Lake, continue to Lake Agnes, then return before the next cold front. At each site she would photograph the fire grate, check the latrine, record damaged trees, and pack out anything visitors had left behind. It was ordinary closing work. The summer crews had already gone back to school, and the last permit on her list belonged to 2 hunters who were due out that morning. Cal Peltier, the district maintenance lead, came through the warehouse carrying a red fuel can. He had spent 27 seasons repairing portages and replacing fire grates with hand tools. He looked at Nora's canoe, then at the white crust on the truck windshield. "Bays had skin on them yesterday," he said. "I will be out before they lock up." Cal set down the can and tested the canoe yoke with his palm. The wood answered with 3 hollow knocks. "That is what everybody says." Nora signed the travel board and wrote down her evening radio window. Cal circled the time with a grease pencil. He did that for every solo trip, even when the ranger promised she had memorized it. The long first portage into Moose River was stiff with frozen mud. Nora carried the canoe on her shoulders and watched her breath pass through the opening beneath the bow. The spruce held the last darkness close to the ground. Somewhere beyond them, water moved under a lid of shore ice. By mid-morning, she was paddling north. Each stroke left a small whirlpool that closed almost at once. Thin ice filled the protected bends of the river. It broke against the canoe with a sound like plates sliding together in a cupboard. The first campsite on Nina Moose Lake looked clean from the water. Nora landed beside the fire grate and followed the usual order. She checked for warm ash. She photographed 2 axe cuts in a living cedar. She walked the faint path to the latrine and noted that the lid needed new bolts. Before leaving, she lifted her food pack onto one shoulder. It came up too easily. She lowered it and opened the roll top. The plastic liner was still twisted and tied. Inside were 4 dinners: oatmeal, coffee, tortillas, peanut butter, dried apples, cheese, and the emergency ration she kept in a separate orange bag. She had packed it herself that morning. Nothing was missing. She blamed the balance of the load. The crosscut saw had been moved to the canoe, and cold gear always felt different against layered clothing. She retied the liner and continued north. The sun dropped behind the jack pines before she finished the second site. Nora chose a camp on the western shore, where the landing faced open water. She set her tent well back from the fire grate and hung the food pack from a branch away from the sleeping area. The rope squeaked against bark as she raised it. After dark, the lake began making its night sounds. Shore ice ticked against stone. A distant crack traveled under the water and faded into the reeds. Nora ate from her metal cup while she completed the site forms by headlamp. 3 knocks came from the north end of the lake. They were evenly spaced. Wood against an aluminum canoe. Nora stopped writing. The spoon rested against her lower lip. She waited for a voice or the scrape of a boat being pulled ashore. Nothing followed. She called across the water. The words traveled farther than she expected and returned from the opposite bank in pieces. No one answered. The 2 hunters might have delayed their exit. They might have found an unlisted campsite and decided to spend another night. Nora checked the permit notes in her map case. Their route was south of hers. The knocks came again. This time they sounded closer. She turned off her headlamp to protect her night vision. The lake was a broad gray surface between black shorelines. No lantern moved among the trees. No canoe crossed the strip of reflected sky. Nora raised Cal on the radio. Static broke around his voice, but she completed her check-in. She mentioned possible visitors north of her position. "No permits up there," he said. "Could be ice." She looked toward the water. Cal added, "Ice does not usually keep count." The signal dropped before she could answer. Nora slept in short sections. Each time she woke, the tent fabric had gathered a harder layer of frost. Near dawn, 3 knocks sounded from the small bay directly below camp. Her hand closed around the radio, but she did not press the transmit switch. Morning showed no canoe at the landing. A sheet of clear ice covered the bay from shore to shore. It held fallen tamarack needles in its surface. Nothing had crossed it. Nora lowered the food pack. It swung high when the rope released, as if someone had removed half its contents during the night. She opened it on the granite beside the fire grate. 2 dinners were gone. So were the tortillas and the block of cheese. The liner had no tear. There were no crumbs in the pack and no tooth marks along the fabric. The knot was the same double turn she had tied before bed. Around the hanging tree, frost covered the moss in an unbroken white film. Her own boot prints ended beneath the rope. No other mark approached from any direction. Nora checked the smaller pockets. Her matches, repair tape, and water filter remained where she had placed them. The missing food should have left space, but the pack still held its shape. When she pressed both hands against the sides, she felt only the remaining meals in the sealed orange emergency bag. She packed camp without making breakfast. At the portage north toward Agnes, she carried everything in one load. The canoe yoke pressed into the muscles beside her neck. Halfway across, the trees thinned enough for her to see Nina Moose Lake behind her. 3 knocks moved across the ice. The first came from the bay she had left. The second came from the center of the lake. The third sounded beside the portage, landing ahead. Nora's right boot stopped above the next root. Her calf began to shake from holding the position. She lowered her foot carefully and kept walking. Agnes was open in the middle, but a clear rim had formed around its shore. Nora pushed the canoe over the ice until the bow reached water, then stepped in without letting the paddle touch the gunwale. She had planned to inspect 4 sites there. She completed one. At the landing, she found an abandoned blue tarp folded beneath a log. There was no litter, no warm ash, and no tracks in the frost except the narrow prints of a fox. She recorded the tarp, packed it into the canoe, and tried another radio call. Cal answered through heavy static. Nora told him about the food. She heard paper moving at the other end. "Come out today," he said. "I have enough emergency ration." "That is not what I said." Then his voice vanished under a steady carrier tone. Years earlier, during a winter training, Cal had spoken about the old Ojibwe stories that belonged to the season when snow covered the ground. He had not told those stories. He had only said that some of them treated hunger as something that could lose its human limits. Nora had remembered the careful way he closed the subject. Now the first fine snow began to fall on Agnes. She turned south. The return crossing took longer because new ice had formed along the river bends. Nora knelt in the canoe and drove the paddle through it. Each broken plate slid under the next. The hull rasped over them with a dry, dragging sound. At the final campsite on Nina Moose, she stopped to rest her shoulders. She placed the food pack beside her and checked the emergency ration bag. 1 energy bar remained. When she looked again, the pack had tipped onto its side. The buckles were closed. It weighed less than the empty blue tarp. Nora spread the contents on the frozen ground. The oatmeal, coffee, dried apples, peanut butter, and remaining dinners were gone. So was the energy bar she had just returned to the orange bag. Only the plastic liner, her cookpot, and a spoon remained. There were no scraps, no smell, no opening large enough for a mouse. 3 knocks sounded beneath the shore ice. The spoon trembled against the cookpot in her hand. Nora set both objects down so they could not make another noise. The knocks repeated farther out. Then again from the river mouth she needed to enter. She loaded the canoe and pushed off. The temperature had fallen, and the open channel through the lake had narrowed to a dark seam. Ice pressed inward from both shores. It flexed under the canoe, whispering along the hull. Halfway across, Nora heard the first knock directly below her seat. The second struck beneath her knees. The third came under the bow. A white fracture opened in the ice ahead. It ran toward the canoe in a straight line, faster than she could paddle. Nora drove the blade down and threw her weight forward. The canoe climbed onto the thin sheet. Ice bent beneath it, then broke in long panels. Water rose over her gloves. She did not look behind her. She paddled until the blade struck gravel, stepped into knee-deep water, and pulled the canoe onto the portage. Her legs folded once on the bank. She stayed on both hands until her boots stopped sliding. The lake settled behind her. 3 knocks came from the empty canoe. Nora left the food pack at the landing. She carried the canoe and her emergency gear through the remaining river bends and portages, moving until the woods became a tunnel between her headlamp and the next patch of frozen mud. She reached the entry point shortly after midnight. Cal was waiting beside the government truck. He wrapped her in a wool blanket, checked her hands, and asked only one question. "Did you count them?" Nora shook her head. He drove back for the abandoned pack with another ranger the following morning. They found it upright at the edge of the portage. The liner was tied. The fabric showed no holes, and fresh snow around it had not been disturbed. At the district office, the pack weighed 6 pounds. Nora's departure checklist placed it at 29. The incident report classified the food loss as probable inventory error combined with small animal activity. The sounds were attributed to thermal expansion in newly formed lake ice. A supervisor added a note stating that fatigue and cold exposure could alter a person's sense of distance over water. Nora signed beneath that conclusion. Cal did not. She continued working for the Forest Service, but she stopped taking solo assignments after freeze-up. She also changed the way she packed. Every meal went into a separate bag with its weight written in pencil. She weighed the full load before entering the wilderness, and again at every campsite. Years later, new rangers sometimes asked why she never rested her paddle across the gunwale. Nora would show them how to keep the blade low, how to enter moving water without striking the hull, and how to listen for ice shifting along the shore. Before every launch, she lifted the paddle clear of the canoe and lowered it without a sound. Story 2. Ethan Cole used an old penny to tighten the mounting plate on his field camera. A screwdriver worked better, but the penny lived in the small pocket of his pack, and it had never fallen out. Under the fluorescent lights of the district workroom, its worn surface gave off a dull copper flash. He turned the screw until the camera stopped shifting, then checked the rest of his equipment: compass, measuring tape, clinometer, radio, paper topographic map, 5 photo boards marked with the condition survey points along Conley Cove Trail. 3 days of hard rain had crossed the Grandfather District. Water had eaten through road shoulders, filled drainage ditches, and brought trees down across several trails. Ethan's assignment was to descend from Kistler Memorial Highway, inspect the tread, and repeat the photographs taken during the previous trail assessment. A later crew would return with cross-cut saws and hand tools. Inside designated wilderness, the repair work stayed quiet and slow. Avery Dunn stood beside the weatherboard, copying the morning forecast onto her notebook. She was covering radio traffic while Ethan was in the gorge. She had also packed him a biscuit from the store at Jonas Ridge because she knew he would otherwise call coffee a meal. "Cloud ceiling is supposed to lift by noon," she said. Ethan looked through the workroom window. The mountains had disappeared behind gray glass. "That forecast come with a warranty?" "Federal warranties expire at the trailhead." He put the biscuit in the top of his pack and signed the field board. His route had 5 fixed survey locations. At each one, he would stand at the recorded bearing, hold the camera at chest height, and photograph the same section of trail shown in the previous report. That made erosion difficult to argue with. A water bar could look acceptable during a quick visit, but a photograph from the same position might show that half the tread had moved downhill. The drive along Kistler Memorial Highway was slow. Wet leaves covered the gravel, and fog filled the spaces between the trees. At the Conley Cove trailhead, Ethan parked the government truck facing out. He logged his mileage, tested the radio, and stepped beneath the hardwood canopy. The trail dropped at once. Conley Cove was not blazed inside the wilderness. It descended through oak, pine, and dense rhododendron, using short switchbacks to lose elevation toward the river. The rain had loosened the surface. Ethan placed each boot carefully and watched for roots polished by water. He heard the Linville River long before he saw it. At first, it was a low vibration behind the wind. Then the gorge narrowed around the sound and gave it weight. Water struck boulders far below, steady enough to pass through the soles of his boots. The first survey point stood beside a bent chestnut oak. Ethan matched the trunk to the old photograph and set his compass bearing. The drainage dip above the point was clogged with leaves. Water had crossed the trail and cut a narrow channel through the outer edge. He measured the loss, filled out the photo board, and took 4 pictures. Before packing the camera, he checked each image for focus. The wet leaves behind the board shone the color of the penny in his pocket. Ethan ate half the biscuit and continued downward. About 10 minutes later, he heard a faint electrical hum. It did not come from the radio. He switched the unit off and held it away from his body. The hum continued beneath the river noise, thin and constant, like a transformer heard from the far side of a building. There were no power lines in the gorge. Ethan took another turn in the trail. Through an opening in the rhododendron, a copper-colored light appeared below him. It was small and sharply defined. It did not flicker through the moving branches. It remained fixed near a cluster of pale rocks where his map placed the second survey point. He watched until fog moved across the slope. The light stayed visible through it. A hiker could be using an amber headlamp. Another employee might have entered from the river trail. Sunlight could also catch wet quartz in ways that made distance hard to judge. Ethan switched the radio back on and called Avery. "Any other crews on Conley?" "Negative. You are the only assignment west of the river. Any vehicle access on the east side?" "Not where you are." The copper light went out while she spoke. Ethan reached the second survey point 7 minutes later. The pale rocks were there. So was the root crown shown in the old assessment photograph. He searched the surrounding slope for foil, glass, reflective trail markers, or a dropped headlamp. He found only wet stone. The hum was gone. He completed the survey. A beech had fallen above the switchback and pulled a section of trail with it. Ethan measured the damaged area, tied a small blue ribbon where the saw crew could find the root ball, and photographed the approach from both directions. When he reviewed the final image, a copper dot showed between 2 trees farther down the trail. The third survey point was in that direction. Ethan wiped the lens with a clean cloth. The dot remained in the photograph. He raised the camera and looked through the viewfinder. The light was there again. It hovered at about the height of a person's chest. No shape surrounded it. No beam touched the ground beneath it. Ethan called Avery once more. "What color?" she asked. "Like an old penny." The radio stayed open for a moment. "Do not tell the information cabin. They will put it on a shirt." Her joke reached him in pieces. The gorge broke radio signals into separate words and placed static between them. Ethan kept descending. The sound of the river grew until it covered his breathing. Whenever the trail turned away from the light, the electrical hum became easier to hear. Whenever he faced it, the river seemed to take over again. At the third point, the light vanished. The site itself had been struck by runoff. A strip of tread had slumped downhill, leaving a narrow shelf above a steep slope. Ethan planted both feet on the inner edge and used the clinometer to estimate the grade. His fingers left damp marks on the instrument. He wiped them on his pants and repeated the measurement. He took the required photographs. In every forward-facing image, a copper dot appeared near the next survey point. In the pictures facing uphill, there was nothing. Clouds covered the open strip of sky. The light could no longer be blamed on direct sun. Ethan removed the camera battery, counted to 20, and replaced it. When the camera restarted, the dots still occupied the same place in the saved images. He put the camera away without deleting them. The fourth point lay near the junction with the Linville Gorge Trail. Reaching it required crossing two steep drainages and a section of tread built into loose soil. Ethan had planned to turn around there if the river was too high. The copper light waited below. It was brighter now. The color had deepened from tarnished metal to a freshly exposed wire. The hum pressed through the river noise and made the fillings in Ethan's back teeth ache. He touched his jaw. His glove came away wet from the mist. The light disappeared as he stepped onto the fourth survey point. Ethan checked the time. The descent had taken almost twice as long as planned. Sunset would reach the bottom of the gorge well before it reached the road above. He called Avery and received only a burst of static. The damage at the junction was serious. Floodwater had undercut the trail and carried away the outer half of the tread. A long crack ran through the remaining shelf. Ethan placed a temporary closure ribbon uphill and recorded the coordinates. The fifth survey point was less than a quarter-mile away. It had been established beside a large white pine and was supposed to document a section where the trail approached the river. Ethan decided to inspect it, then climb out. The trail beyond the junction had changed. Small stones covered the tread. Several rhododendron roots hung in open air. The ground beneath them had washed downslope toward the river. Then the hum returned. The copper light appeared through the trees at the exact bearing of the fifth point. Ethan stopped. His left hand tightened around the shoulder strap of his pack. The light seemed close enough to reach within a minute. It rested at chest height, steady and round. He moved toward it. The trail curved around a rock outcrop. The light remained directly ahead, though the map showed the survey point should now be to his right. Ethan checked the compass. The needle settled. He checked again. The light was standing in the wrong place. He took one more step. The soil beneath his front boot broke away, without a sound he could hear over the river. His knee struck the slope. One hand caught a rhododendron stem while his measuring tape slid from an open pocket. The yellow case bounced once, crossed the copper light, and vanished. There was no ground beneath the light. It hung over a fresh landslide that dropped toward the river. The white pine marking the fifth point had fallen with the trail. Its exposed roots lay far below. Ethan held the rhododendron until his fingers cramped around the stem. Then he moved backward on both knees, keeping his weight against the inside slope. The copper light went out. For several seconds, the hum remained. It ended with a soft click. Ethan crawled to stable ground and sat against the rock outcrop. His breath came through his nose in short pulls. He tried the radio until Avery's voice surfaced beneath the static. "Turn around," she said. He did. The climb out began in early darkness. Ethan wore his headlamp on its lowest setting to preserve the batteries. The river gradually fell behind him, but the electrical hum returned at every switchback. At the fourth survey point, a copper light waited beside the closure ribbon. It vanished when his boot touched the recorded location. Another appeared above him at the third point, then another at the second. Each one occupied the place he needed to reach. Each one disappeared before he arrived. Ethan stopped trying to photograph them. He kept the camera inside his pack and watched the trail at his feet. The final light appeared beside the bent chestnut oak at the first survey point. It was bright enough to show through his closed eyelids when he looked down. The hum followed him to within a few steps of the trailhead. Then the truck's headlights flashed as Avery unlocked it from the road. The copper light was gone. Avery found Ethan sitting on the rear bumper with mud covering one knee. He handed her the camera before accepting water. "Do not open those on the small screen," he said. They reviewed the photographs at the district office. The copper dot appeared in 14 images. Its position changed with each survey location. Using the recorded bearings, Avery plotted the lights on the trail map. Every dot marked the next photo point. The image from the landslide showed the brightest one suspended beyond the broken edge. There was no visible source and no ground beneath it. The official trail report documented storm damage, one major slope failure, and immediate closure of the lower section. A separate note attributed the lights to moisture inside the camera, lens reflection, fog, and distant vehicle traffic. The explanation remained. even though Kistler Memorial Highway was closed beyond the trailhead that day. The photographs were removed from the public copy of the report. The original stayed in a restricted project folder until a server migration several years later. After that, only 3 could be located. Ethan continued working in the grandfather district. He still surveyed damaged trails, but he changed his routine. He stopped carrying the old penny. He also added 1 photograph that no condition assessment required. At every survey point, before looking toward the trail ahead, Ethan turns around and photographs the ground he has already crossed. Story 3. The pack string reached Mogollon Baldy shortly after sunrise. Leah Morrow heard the bell on the lead mule before she saw the animals climbing through the trees. The sound rose from the south ridge in slow intervals, followed by hooves striking loose rock. She left the lookout cab and met the packer beside the supply cache. Together they unloaded water cans, propane, batteries, vegetables, and a canvas mail sack. The nearest trailhead was a long day away on foot. Everything heavy came up by mule, and everything empty went back the same way. The packer, Domingo Salas, handed Leah a paper bag before tightening the lash ropes. "Peaches," he said. "Eat them before the mice do." Leah placed 1 peach on the lookout windowsill. It had bruised during the climb, and juice darkened the bottom of the bag. She saved fresh food for the first few days after resupply. By the end of each cycle, meals came from cans and dry packets that all tasted faintly of the wooden cabinet. This was Leah's 5th season in a fire lookout. Her workday began with glass. She cleaned the windows, then walked the catwalk with binoculars. Morning haze lay in the drainages. The high ridges stood above it like long islands. She checked known dust sources, a ranch road far to the west, and the pale line left by a mine beyond the forest boundary. A lookout learned those marks early. Dust widened near the ground. Morning vapor disappeared as the air warmed. Smoke held together and leaned with the wind. At the center of the cab stood the Osborne Firefinder. Its circular map was fixed beneath an azimuth ring, with a sighting arm pivoted over the exact position of the tower. When Leah spotted smoke, the instrument gave her a bearing. Another lookout could take a second bearing, and dispatch would place the fire where the 2 lines crossed. At 8 o'clock, she made the morning radio check. The district repeater answered with a high chirp, followed by a lower tone. Leah waited for the tail to clear, then gave her call sign and status. Mogollon Baldy in service. Visibility good. No smokes. Silver City dispatch acknowledged. Marisol Vega was working the console that morning. Leah recognized her by the slight pause she left before repeating a location. The rest of the morning passed in small tasks. Leah logged the water delivery, replaced a loose screen clip, and swept moth wings from beneath the Firefinder. At noon she ate the peach over the sink, turning it in her hand so the juice would not run down her sleeve. Her daily fire weather observation was due at 1 o'clock. She laid out the weather sheet, checked the hand anemometer, and carried the sling psychrometer onto the shaded side of the catwalk. Temperature, relative humidity, wind, cloud cover, and visibility all went into the report. The procedure never changed. At 12 minutes before 1, the repeater opened by itself. High chirp, low tone. Leah reached for the radio. Her own voice came through the speaker. Mogollon Baldy weather, temperature 68, relative humidity 16%. Wind southwest at 8, correction, gusting to 14. Cumulus building west. Visibility 100 miles. The transmission ended with a dry cough. Leah kept her hand above the microphone. A small muscle moved beside her thumb. The radio showed no stuck transmit light, and the spare microphone rested untouched on its hook. Marisol called from dispatch. Mogollon Baldy, confirm early weather. Leah looked at the instruments waiting on the table. Negative. I have not taken it. Your traffic was clear. It was not mine. No one answered for several seconds. Then Marisol asked her to continue with the scheduled observation. At 1 o'clock, Leah wet the wick on the psychrometer and stepped outside. The readings settled at 68 degrees and 16% relative humidity. The hand anemometer held near 8 miles per hour. She wrote the values slowly. Clouds had begun forming over the western ridges. As Leah keyed the microphone, a moth flew from the window frame and struck her cheek. Dust caught in her throat. She began the report. The wind increased before she reached that line. The anemometer jumped. Wind southwest at 8, she said. Correction, gusting to 14. She finished the visibility reading and coughed once. The pencil lead broke when she pressed it against the weather sheet. Marisol acknowledged the report without mentioning the earlier transmission. At 2:17, the repeater opened again. The same two tones crossed the cab. Leah turned in her chair. Her voice said, Mogollon Baldy smoke report. North 33 degrees, 14 minutes. West 108 degrees, 41 minutes. Single column, light gray, whitewater drainage. Leah was already at the firefinder before the transmission ended. She set the sighting arm toward the coordinate and raised her binoculars. There was no smoke. The whitewater drainage lay beneath a clear section of sky. Sunlight moved across old burned scars and standing dead trees. Nothing rose above the ridges. She called dispatch and asked whether another lookout had reported the coordinate. Negative, Marisol said. Leah watched the location for 23 minutes. A thin gray thread appeared between two ridges. It rose straight for a short distance, then leaned northeast. Leah placed the firefinder sight on its base and read the azimuth twice. Black Mountain Lookout provided a cross bearing. The lines met near the coordinate spoken by Leah's voice. Dispatch sent an aircraft to investigate. The crew found a lightning holdover burning inside a dead snag. A storm had crossed the drainage 2 nights earlier. The explanation fit the fire. It did not fit the radio. Leah copied the coordinate onto her map with a red grease pencil. Beside it, she wrote the time of the first transmission, and the time smoke became visible. At 4 minutes past 4, the tones sounded again. Her voice reported another coordinate. This one lay south of the first and several miles closer to Mogollon Baldy. Leah turned the firefinder and found clear air. No smoke appeared during the next radio check. It showed itself near sunset. The column was low and blue, almost level with the ridge. Leah might have missed it if she had not known exactly where to look. Dispatch confirmed that a second holdover had surfaced. Marisol's voice became quieter. Do not report anything you cannot see. I did not send those coordinates. The recorder has your call sign. That night, Leah plotted both smokes. The red marks sat on separate drainages. A straight line drawn through them pointed toward the lookout. But many straight lines could be drawn across a wilderness map. She left the ruler in its drawer. Wind pushed against the shutters after midnight. Each loose section of metal had its own sound. Leah knew all of them. The repeater tones were not among them. She sat up in her bunk and waited. The radio remained quiet. The next day's weather report came through 11 minutes early. Her voice gave a lower humidity and stronger southwest wind. Leah switched the radio off before the report finished. The base set went dark. The backup handheld on the table opened instead. Her voice continued from the point where it had stopped. Leah removed the handheld battery. The cab held only wind and the small clicking of the cooling stove. At 1 o'clock, the weather matched the unfinished report. Shortly afterward, Black Mountain Lookout called her on the direct channel. Mogollon, you are doubling with yourself. Leah pressed the microphone against her palm. Are you hearing the words? Enough of them. The operator at Black Mountain had worked lookouts for more than 30 years. He usually filled radio gaps with jokes about coffee and visitors. This time, he spoke one sentence. If your call sign comes before you key up, do not answer it. Then he signed off. The next coordinate arrived at 3:20. It lay less than 2 miles west of the tower. No smoke stood there. Leah marked the point and kept her binoculars trained on it. The sky had changed since noon. Tall clouds built over the Arizona line, bright on top and dark underneath. Their shadows moved across the Gila, one drainage at a time. At 3:58, a column appeared at the predicted coordinate. A lightning detection report reached dispatch several minutes later. The recorded strike had occurred after the radio gave the location. Marisol asked Leah to switch channels. The repeater opened before she could do it. High chirp, low tone. Leah's voice sounded strained and close to the microphone. Mogollon Baldy smoke report. North 33 degrees, 16 minutes. west 108 degrees, 36 minutes. One snag involved, light gray building, approximately 1/8 mile east of the lookout. Leah knew the coordinate without checking. It was the summit. The sky above Mogollon Baldy was still blue, but the western cloud had grown across half the horizon. Its underside flashed without thunder. Leah unplugged the radio microphone and stepped away from the windows. Marisol called on the handheld. "Storm moving east. Follow your lightning procedure." Leah secured loose equipment and closed the shutters on the weather side. The cab's grounding system had been inspected before the season, but she still moved away from the firefinder and every metal surface she could avoid. The first thunder reached the tower as a low movement under the floor. Rain did not follow. Static lifted the hair along Leah's forearms. The disconnected base radio gave one high chirp. A white line struck below the east catwalk. The report arrived through Leah's body before the sound reached her. Her knees hit the wooden floor. The cab filled with the smell of hot dust and sharp metal. Then the thunder broke over the summit. Leah stayed down until the windows stopped vibrating. Outside, a dead fir burned 1/8 of a mile east of the tower. Smoke rose light gray through the branches. A single snag was involved. The column began to build. Leah reconnected the microphone because the fire required a report. She gave the coordinate, fuel type, smoke color, and estimated size. Her voice caught near the end, and she coughed once before signing off. Dispatch recorded 2 nearly identical transmissions. The first was logged 18 minutes before the lightning strike. The second followed it. A heli-tac crew reached the fire before dark and contained it around the snag. Leah remained at the lookout until relief arrived the following afternoon. The radio investigation found no stored audio in either of her sets. Technicians tested the repeater, replaced a controller, and blamed overlapping traffic combined with a clock synchronization error at dispatch. The early weather transmissions and 4 advanced smoke reports were relabeled as duplicate records. The lightning detection data stayed unchanged, so did Leah's handwritten times. Her supervisor collected the original weather sheets and placed copies in the station file. The incident summary stated that isolation, workload, and repeated radio traffic had caused confusion over transmission order. Leah signed only the equipment inventory attached to it. She finished the season, but she did not return to Mogollon Baldy. She accepted a fuels position that kept her closer to roads and other crews. Radio work remained part of every assignment. There is one procedure Leah follows that appears in no field manual. If a repeater opens before she touches the transmit button, she removes the battery from her radio and sets it on the ground. She does not put it back until someone else has spoken first. Story 4. Dean Rusk began each patrol by setting the clock on his body camera. The unit gained almost a minute every few days, and a defense attorney had once spent an entire hearing asking why a citation appeared to be written before a vehicle stop. Dean had learned to remove small questions before they became large ones. He synchronized the camera with the dispatch clock, checked the radio, and loaded evidence bags into the rear compartment of his government truck. His wife had packed a thermos of coffee and a ham sandwich. She had written "Eat this" on the paper bag, because Dean had brought the same sandwich home twice that week. The Marionville Ranger District was entering the busiest part of hunting season. Dean's morning list included an abandoned fire ring near a gated road, 2 reports of illegal off-highway vehicle use, and a complaint about new trail markings inside Hickory Creek Wilderness. The last item came from a volunteer named Elise Mercer. She was waiting at the office with mud on her boots and a bright yellow plastic diamond sealed inside a grocery bag. "I found 6 of these," she said. All past the South Bend. The marker had been cut by hand. One corner was clipped at an angle, and 2 brass roofing nails remained in it. Hickory Creek Trail was only lightly marked. Its old yellow blazes had been allowed to fade, and some sections required hikers to read the tread rather than follow fresh paint. Dean turned the plastic over without touching it. "Did you remove the others?" "No. I photographed them and came out." She opened a map and showed him where the first marker appeared. It was attached to the back of a hemlock, facing hikers traveling clockwise around the loop. "The real blazes help you stay on the trail," Elise said. "Those only work from one direction." Dean postponed the vehicle complaints and drove toward Hickory Creek. Autumn had settled across the plateau. Beech leaves covered the road's shoulders, and black cherry branches clicked above the truck. At the trailhead, one passenger car sat near the information board. It was a gray Subaru with Ohio plates. A blue knit cap rested on the dashboard. Dean logged the plate and checked the registration through dispatch. The vehicle belonged to a woman from Akron named Lindsay Webb. There was no active report connected to her name or the car. The first official blaze on the loop was little more than a yellow stain on a maple. Dean photographed it for comparison. He then started clockwise, carrying his field pack, evidence kit, and service radio. The trail moved through rolling hardwood forest. It crossed shallow runs, climbed low ridges, and disappeared beneath fallen leaves whenever the ground leveled. Hickory Creek did not need cliffs to hide people. The trees stood close enough to reduce the world to the next 50 yards. Dean found the first false marker after an hour. The plastic was brighter than any official blaze. Its clipped corner pointed down and left, toward a narrow opening between two hemlocks. A faint path continued beyond them. Dean photographed the marker from both directions. From the clockwise approach, it looked like a clear instruction to turn. From the opposite direction, the tree trunk concealed it. He followed the side path without removing the marker. The path used an old grade left from logging before the wilderness designation. Ferns covered most of it, but boots had pressed a dark line through the center. The next yellow diamond appeared low on a beach, then another. Each one faced inward. None guided a person back to the loop. Dean marked the route on his topographic map and checked his position with a handheld satellite unit. The false trail curved away from the nearest road and descended toward Middle Hickory Creek. He expected to find an illegal hunting camp. The setup would usually include a tarp, bait, tree stands, and enough litter to fill the truck bed. The fresh markers might belong to someone who did not trust a compass. Then Dean heard the scanner. The sound reached him as a burst of squelch from farther down the grade. A dispatcher's voice followed. She was reading the license plate of a vehicle stopped on another part of the forest. Dean lowered his radio volume. The voice ahead repeated the plate half a second after his earpiece received it. Someone was monitoring district traffic. Dean moved off the path and continued through the trees. He avoided dry branches and kept the creek on his left. The scanner sounded twice more. Each transmission came from the same low area. He smelled coffee before he saw the camp. It sat beneath a camouflage tarp stretched between hemlocks. The fabric hung low enough to disappear from the false path. A narrow solar panel leaned against a log. Plastic storage boxes, a sleeping roll, and a camp stove had been arranged on platforms made from cut saplings. Dean watched for several minutes. No one entered or left. He called dispatch on a secondary channel and gave his location. The signal broke after the first few words. He climbed several yards uphill and tried again. "Possible occupied camp," he said. "One subject unknown. Start state police toward the trailhead." Dispatch confirmed. Dean activated his body camera and approached. The scanner rested on an overturned bucket. Beside it lay a laminated sheet listing Forest Service, Pennsylvania Game Commission, County Fire, and state police frequencies. A second page showed Dean's usual patrol days. Someone had added notes beside his name. Morning office, North Roads after lunch, radio gap near creek. Dean's tongue pressed against the back of his teeth. He stepped sideways so his body would not block the camera. A binder sat open on a storage box. It contained photographs. Most had been taken from a distance. Hikers unloaded packs at trailheads, filtered water, cooked beside tents, or walked alone beneath trees. Dates and locations were written on the backs. Small marks identified vehicles, direction of travel, and expected nights in the wilderness. Dean recognized the gray Subaru in 3 pictures. The latest image showed Lindsay Webb leaving the Hickory Creek trailhead that morning. She wore the blue knit cap from her dashboard and carried a red overnight pack. Another photograph showed a man in a green rain jacket near Minister Creek. The date was 6 days earlier. His face was clear. Dean photographed every visible page without moving the binder. He saw no names, only descriptions. Solo, no dog, clockwise. The coffee mug beside the scanner was still damp. A cooking pot held water that had not yet collected leaves or insects. Whoever used the camp had left recently. A light metallic tap sounded uphill. Dean turned toward it. Another tap followed. The noise was small, a hammer striking a roofing nail. Dean moved behind a hemlock and rested one hand on his holster. Through the branches, a bright yellow shape appeared on a tree that had been bare when he passed it. The clipped corner pointed east, away from the trailhead. Dean backed out of the camp without touching the binder or scanner. He kept the tree between himself and the sound. When he reached the false path, the marker he had photographed earlier was gone. The next one had been turned. It now pointed toward a steep drainage filled with fallen branches. Dean used his compass instead. He climbed north across the slope, aiming for the main loop rather than retracing the false route. Wet leaves shifted beneath his boots. He placed each step against roots or exposed soil. Footsteps moved parallel to him. They stopped when he stopped. When Dean changed direction, a branch snapped farther uphill. He keyed the radio. Officer needs expedited backup. Subject moving in the woods. Only static returned. The forest folded the signal into the same low ground noted on the camp schedule. Dean continued toward higher terrain. After several minutes, the footsteps moved ahead of him. He heard fabric scrape bark, then the mechanical click of pruning shears. A man crossed an opening between two beeches. Dean saw a dark cap, a tan jacket, and a pack with something long secured along one side. The man did not look toward him. He moved uphill and disappeared behind the ridge. Dean drew his sidearm, but kept it pointed at the ground. "Federal officer, stop and show me your hands." The only answer was the sound of someone running through leaves. Dean did not chase. He moved to the ridge and transmitted again. This time dispatch heard enough to confirm that 2 state troopers were entering from the trailhead. The main loop lay less than half a mile east. Dean reached it near a faded official blaze. A new plastic diamond had been nailed directly below the old paint. Its clipped corner pointed back toward the camp. Dean left it in place for the search team and continued toward the trailhead. Near sunset, he heard an engine start beyond the trees. It came from the direction of the parking area. The sound rose, held for several seconds, then faded along the state road. Dean reached the lot 8 minutes later. The gray Subaru remained. His government truck sat beside it with the right rear tire flat. A narrow puncture marked the sidewall. A yellow plastic diamond had been tucked beneath the driver's windshield wiper. The clipped corner pointed toward Dean's seat. The state troopers arrived before dark. One stayed with the vehicles, while Dean led the second officer toward the camp. They found the false trail, but most of the markers had been removed. The camp was empty. The scanner, frequency sheets, binder, photographs, and solar panel were gone. Wet rectangles in the leaves showed where the storage boxes had stood. Coffee remained in the mug, and fresh tool marks covered several cut saplings. Dean's body camera preserved what the camp no longer contained. Investigators circulated still images from the binder. Lindsay Webb was reported overdue by her sister later that night. Searchers found her the following morning beside an old grade several miles from the loop. She said bright markers had led her away from the trail. Near dusk, she heard a man moving behind her and hid beneath a fallen tree until morning. The man in the green jacket was reported missing 2 days after Dean entered the camp. His vehicle had been parked at Minister Creek. No verified sighting placed him after the photograph in the binder. 2 other photographed hikers were connected to reports filed during the following week. One returned home without incident. The other had left a campsite before dawn after finding yellow markers around his tent. The camp occupant was never identified. Investigators recovered partial fingerprints from the coffee mug and 1 boot impression near the creek. Neither produced a match. A dark pickup seen leaving the area carried a plate stolen from a vehicle in Ohio. The public closure order cited resource damage and an active law enforcement investigation. It did not mention the photographs or patrol schedule. Those remained in a sealed federal case file. Dean returned to duty, but he stopped entering Hickory Creek alone. He also changed how he read trail markers. Color and direction were no longer enough. He checked the material, the fastener, the height, and which side of the tree carried it. Whenever he passes a reassurance marker, Dean walks 10 yards beyond it, turns around, and checks where it sends the person coming behind him. Story 5. Rain made a different sound on every surface in the inlet. It whispered over hemlock needles. It struck the salmon stream with a flat, steady patter. On the overturned aluminum skiff, it rang like dry rice poured across a metal tray. Beneath those sounds came the slow shove of the tide. Mara Bell heard it before daylight while she tightened the straps on her chest waders. Water moved through the dark beyond the field cabin, lifting kelp from the beach and laying it down again. Each retreat dragged 1,000 small stones toward the channel. Caleb Sloan was already outside, checking the fuel line on the skiff. He worked by headlamp with a mug balanced on the gunwale. "Coffee is mostly grounds," he said. "Then chew it." He laughed and keyed the marine radio. "Angoon Base, survey team departing cabin, 2 persons aboard. Returning by 1700. Static washed through the speaker. Then the dispatcher confirmed their float plan and repeated the weather. Rain through the afternoon, southeast wind increasing, a high tide shortly after noon. Mara had written the tide times on the top of her waterproof field sheet. She circled the afternoon high and tapped it with her pencil before sealing the paper inside its clear case. They were checking a small coho stream on the western side of Admiralty Island. It was the last spawning survey there that season. They would count live fish, mark fresh reds, record carcasses, and retrieve a temperature logger upstream. Brown bear tracks could cover their own prints between the walk-in and the walk-out. A creek at ankle depth could reach a wader belt after one night of rain. They beached the skiff in a narrow cove and tied the bow above the rack line. From there, they walked around a rock point exposed by the falling tide. The route was a shelf of black gravel no wider than a truck bed. Mara stopped at the point and looked back. "We leave the stream by 11:30, she said. "No matter where we are on the count." Caleb checked his watch. Plenty of room. At the stream mouth, they clipped bear spray to the front of their waders. Mara called out before each blind bend. Caleb followed with the data case and the measuring staff. The first live coho held below a logjam. Its back moved under the brown water like a piece of wet slate. Mara counted aloud. Caleb repeated the number and wrote it down. They worked upstream in short sections, keeping 1 person on each side whenever the channel allowed it. Near the 4th habitat unit, Caleb crouched to classify the bed material. He lifted 2 rounded stones from the water and knocked them together to clear the algae. Click, click. The sound was small and hard. It carried farther than Mara expected. "Cobble," he said, and dropped both stones. They continued. By mid-morning, rain drummed on their hoods. Salmon carcasses soured the mineral smell of the creek, and a raven called above the canopy. At the upper limit, Mara found the logger cable still wrapped around the alder root. She knelt in the current and worked the small padlock with bare fingers. The metal had packed itself with sand. Caleb stood beside her, holding the data case under his rain jacket. 2 wet stones touched on the far bank. Click! Click! Mara looked up. Across the creek, sword ferns trembled beneath the rain. No stone moved. The bank was too steep for a salmon, and the water below it was only a few inches deep. Then Caleb's voice came from behind those ferns. "Mara, bring the tag kit." The Caleb beside her stopped breathing through his mouth. For several seconds, neither of them shifted. Water folded around Mara's knees. Her fingers stayed closed around the little padlock until its edges pressed white marks into her skin. Caleb leaned close enough for his shoulder to touch hers. "I did not say that." Mara stood. She kept her eyes on the opposite bank. "Raven," she said. "That came from ground level. They get low." She freed the logger and fastened it inside the data case. They ended the survey there. On the way downstream, Caleb stayed on Mara's side of the channel. They no longer called around the bends. Instead, they struck the measuring staff against exposed roots before moving forward. The knocks sounded dull and wooden. Nothing answered. At 11:16, they reached the tidal flat. The gravel shelf around the point was gone. Gray water pushed against the rock face and lifted strands of kelp into the spruce branches at its base. Their skiff lay in the cove beyond the point, less than a quarter-mile away. They could not see it from where they stood. Mara checked the tide card again. They had left the upper station earlier than planned. Even so, the water was higher than the table predicted. Wind had been driving into the inlet since morning. Low pressure had added the rest. Caleb tested the edge with the measuring staff. The bottom dropped beyond reach. "We wait," Mara said. There was high ground above the stream mouth. They climbed to it and pulled their jackets over the tops of their waders. Mara sent a delayed return message through the satellite unit. The transmission waited for a clear view of the sky. They ate standing under a cedar. Caleb opened a packet of smoked salmon and offered half to Mara. She shook her head. Her jaw had been tight since the creek, and the muscles near her ears had begun to ache. The rain changed direction. From across the flooded channel came two clean clicks. Click, click. Caleb lowered the food. His own voice called from beyond the point. "Mara, bring the tag kit." This time, the final word dragged slightly. The sound stretched across the water and broke apart in the rain. Mara took the marine radio from her vest. "Survey team to Angoon base." Only static returned. She tried again on the working channel, then on the emergency hailing channel. The rock point blocked the line toward town, and the forest above them rose for hundreds of feet. The voice across the channel repeated itself. "Mara, bring the tag kit." Caleb sealed the smoked salmon without looking down. His thumb missed the zipper twice. "It heard me say that last week," he said. Mara turned to him. He had used those words during a survey north of Angoon, when Mara found an old plastic tag on a fish across the creek. She remembered. Rain ran off the front of Caleb's hood in a steady line. His face had lost color around the mouth. "Ravens travel," Mara said. Caleb did not answer. They moved higher into the timber. Each step sank into fallen needles. Devil's Club crowded the openings. The tide disappeared below the bank, but they could still hear it moving through the trees. Mara kept the radio volume high. Static filled the space between them. 2 hours passed. The satellite message remained queued. At 2 in the afternoon, a voice came through the radio speaker. "Survey team, what is your status?" It sounded like the Angoon dispatcher. The words were faint but clear. Mara raised the radio to reply. Click, click. The sound came from the flooded forest below them, not from the speaker. Caleb caught her wrist before she pressed the transmit button. The dispatcher's voice spoke again. "Mara, bring the tag kit." Static closed over it. Mara removed the radio battery. Her hands shook, so Caleb released the latch for her. The speaker gave one last soft hiss. From farther uphill, Mara's voice said Caleb's name. He turned halfway before stopping himself. They stood back to back. Mara hooked one finger through the carrying loop on his data case. Caleb gripped the shoulder strap of her pack. It was an awkward way to move, but neither of them let go. The clicks shifted around the slope. Sometimes they came from below, sometimes from the muskeg above. Each pair was separated by the same short interval, as if 2 stones were held in one hand and tested against each other. After every pair, a voice followed. Caleb's voice asked for the tag kit. The dispatcher requested their status. Then Mara heard herself make the morning radio call, including the exact pause where she had looked at Caleb to confirm their return time. The words came from the trees in front of them. Something orange stood between 2 spruce trunks. Mara noticed the color first. Caleb wore the same orange rain shell. The figure uphill showed one sleeve and part of a shoulder, motionless beyond a screen of dripping branches. Caleb was still attached to her pack. Neither of them spoke. The orange shape moved behind the nearer trunk. There was no crack of brush, no foot pressed into the wet ground, only rain on leaves. Caleb pulled once on Mara's strap. They backed down the slope. Near the tidal bank, they found fresh brown bear sign in the mud. A track wider than Mara's hand pointed toward the creek. Under ordinary conditions, she would have changed direction at once. She stepped into it instead. The tide had begun to fall. Water still covered the gravel shelf, but the current had eased. Mara used the measuring staff to find the outer edge, knee-deep, then thigh-deep. The rock wall left no room to climb if the water rose. They waited another 20 minutes. From the cove beyond the point came 2 clicks. Caleb's voice said, "Plenty of room." Those were the words he had used that morning. Mara cinched her wader belt until it pressed into her ribs. She clipped the data case to the front of her pack and stepped into the channel. Caleb followed with one hand locked around her shoulder strap. The water reached the tops of Mara's thighs. Kelp wrapped around her boots and tugged backward. She planted the staff, moved 1 foot, and planted it again. Halfway around the point, the skiff came into view. A person stood beside it. Orange sleeve, dark waders, hood raised. Rain hid the face. Mara stopped. Caleb struck her pack from behind. The figure lifted one arm and pointed toward the boat. The gesture was Caleb's. He used it whenever engine noise made speech useless. Beside Mara, the real Caleb made a thin sound through his nose. 2 stones clicked beneath the skiff. The figure spoke in Mara's voice. "Caleb." Mara drove the measuring staff into the gravel and kept moving. The water climbed above her belt for 3 steps. Cold pressed through every layer. Caleb's grip twisted the pack strap against her neck. They rounded the last shoulder of rock. The space beside the skiff was empty. No one climbed the bank. No branches moved. Rain stippled the cove from shore to shore. Mara reached the bowline and missed it on her first attempt. Caleb got both hands under the gunwale. Together they shoved the skiff into deeper water and fell over the side. Caleb pulled the starter cord. The engine turned but did not catch. From under the hull came 1 click. Then the second. The motor started. Caleb opened the throttle before Mara had coiled the line. The skiff climbed onto plane and left the cove with the rope beating against its side. Neither of them looked back at the point. Their delayed message transmitted once they reached open water. Angoon Base called immediately. Mara reattached the radio battery, reported that both crew members were aboard, and gave their position. She did not mention the voices. At the dock, a local boat operator named Simon Dalton helped them tie off. He had grown up in Angoon and had carried survey crews around Admiralty Island for most of his life. He looked at their faces and asked one question. Did it call from the water or the trees? Mara's wet hand tightened around the bowline. Both. Simon looked toward the inlet. He said a Tlingit name quietly. Kushtaka. Caleb asked what it meant. Simon pulled the knot tight. Not here, he said. The incident report was filed 3 days later. It described an unexpected storm surge, temporary tidal isolation, radio interference, and possible auditory distortion caused by heavy rain against steep terrain. A safety review recommended a wider tide margin for future stream surveys. The report also noted probable raven mimicry. Mara signed it. Caleb did not. He transferred to a hatchery position that winter. He would work beside concrete raceways, under electric lights, with other people always close enough to touch. Mara stayed in field fisheries. She still runs spawning surveys in southeast Alaska. She still works in brown bear country, crosses cold streams, and writes the tide times at the top of every field sheet. One practice changed. When a coworker calls her name from behind the rain, Mara does not answer. She waits until the person comes into view. Then she watches their mouth form her name. Story 6. Snow did not make the dry river valley silent. It removed distance. The river grinding beneath its ice sounded close enough to touch, even when it ran far below the trail. A spruce branch shedding snow sounded like a coat being shaken beside Owen Price's ear. Voices lost their edges after 20 yards. At the trailhead on Route 302, orange fiberglass wands hummed against the side of a gear trailer. The wind bent them together and released them. Whir, whir. Owen held the bundle while a base volunteer tightened its storage strap. The wands would be used only if the search widened into open terrain above tree line. Inside the wilderness, Owen preferred a compass. He had worked winter searches for 9 seasons. He warmed the spare radio battery inside his parka and carried a paper map in a clear chest case. Cold made electronics optimistic. The missing hiker was Nolan Reeves, a respiratory therapist from Concord. He had planned one night at Dry River Shelter No. 3, then a climb toward the southern presidential range. His wife said he carried a phone, a compass, and one emergency beacon. He did not carry trail wands. The last message from his phone had arrived the previous afternoon, made the first big crossing, snow deeper than expected. No location followed it. The search coordinator stood beneath the raised hatch of a utility vehicle and pointed to the drainage on Owen's map. "Work the trail to the shelter," she said. "Watch for shortcuts near the washouts." Hurricane damage had shifted sections of the Dry River Trail years before. Repaired tread ran beside old tread, and winter covered both with the same clean surface. The coordinator folded her arms against the wind. "If you lose the corridor, trust the contour and the water. Do not trust anything upright. People place markers where they start making bad decisions." Owen nodded. He had heard versions of that warning before. At 6:40, he and Ben entered the trees. They wore snowshoes and carried crampons for steeper ground. Ben pulled a rescue sled loaded with a vacuum mattress, hypothermia wrap, stove, and medical kit. The trail descended toward the river, crossed side streams, and climbed again through spruce and birch. Snow had fallen through the night. It lay dry over an older crust, deep enough to hide roots, but not deep enough to soften them. At every crossing, one ranger probed while the other stayed back with the rope. The ice near running water had a gray center and white shelves along the edges. Owen listened before putting weight on it. The river spoke in low knocks. By late morning, they had found no fresh track. Ben stopped twice to clear ice from the rescue sled runners. Owen radioed their position and received a reply broken by static. Near a storm washout, they found the first orange wand. It stood 3 feet above the snow beside a bent yellow birch. Silver reflective tape covered its top. One narrow band of black tape wrapped the shaft. Owen raised a hand. Ben stopped behind him. The sled runners gave a soft wooden creak. There were no wands marked on the search map. The base team had not passed them. Snow around the shaft was smooth. Owen photographed it and called the coordinator. "One unauthorized route marker. Orange fiberglass. Appears new. Negative. Log it as a clue. Follow only if terrain permits." Beyond the birch, a second wand stood between 2 spruces. It carried 2 black bands. A third waited farther uphill with 3. The line pointed away from the maintained trail. Owen checked the compass. Northeast. That direction would cut a bend and rejoin Dry River Trail before the next crossing. A person trying to save time might choose it. Ben crouched beside the first wand. "No rime," he said. Everything else wore a feathered layer of wind-blown ice. The orange shaft was clean. Owen looked uphill. "We checked the line." They left the rescue sled under a reflective tarp and marked its location. Ben carried the hypothermia kit. Owen carried the rope and stove. The wands continued in a straight row, 1 band, 2, 3, 4. Each stood about 30 yards from the next. Snow between them showed no boot prints, but spindrift had been moving through the trees all morning. At the 6th wand, Ben tied a short piece of blue survey tape below the black bands. "So we know these are the same ones on the way back." The plastic ribbon fluttered against the shaft. Whir, whir. They passed the 7th wand and reached a shallow rise. The 8th stood beyond it. Owen turned to check their back trail. The first wand was 10 yards behind him, 1 black band. Beyond it stood the wand with 2 bands, then 3, then 4. The line continued downhill in ascending order. Owen looked at the untouched snow around his boots. The nearest wand should have carried 7 bands. One should have been the farthest away. Ben turned slowly. "We walked past those." Owen counted again, 1 through 7, beginning at his heels. The row had reversed itself. He stepped to the nearest wand. Its shaft had the same shallow gouge he had noticed beside the birch. Its hole continued into the older crust. Ben walked to the 6th marker. The blue ribbon was still tied beneath its bands. Neither ranger spoke for several seconds. Owen's breath dampened the fabric over his mouth. The moisture began to freeze along the seam. He took a bearing toward the trail. "We go back." They turned southwest. Owen held the compass flat against his chest and walked without using the wands. Ben followed within arm's reach. After 12 minutes, they reached the bent yellow birch. The reflective tarp and rescue sled were gone. Their snowshoe tracks arrived from the opposite side of the tree and ended beneath its branches. Ben removed 1 glove and pressed his fingers into the track. "That is my shoe." Owen recognized the broken outer cleat. Ben had caught it on a rock that morning. The print pointed northeast. They had approached from the southwest. Owen called base. Static filled the first attempt. On the second, the coordinator answered. Price, your tracker has sent the same position 4 times. We have been moving. Your last points are inside a circle less than 100 yards across. Owen looked at the compass. The needle settled where it should. Confirm our bearing to the river. West, then downhill. He ended the call and checked the map. West would cross the missing trail corridor and reach the dry river. Once at the water, they could follow it downstream. Ben put his glove back on. His fingers missed the cuff twice. They moved west. The slope rose beneath them. Owen checked the compass again. West. The contour lines showed a descent, but every step climbed. Spruce branches lowered until the men had to crawl beneath them. The snow grew deeper around their knees. Behind them came the dry flutter of plastic tape. Whir, whir. Owen did not turn. The sound followed for several minutes. It stayed the same distance away through every change in pace. When they reached the top of the rise, Dry River Shelter Number 3 stood below them. The 3-sided structure faced the river. Snow had drifted halfway up its open front. One empty food pouch lay frozen near the fire ring. They should have been miles from it. Ben read the shelter sign, then took out the global positioning unit. The screen placed them near the yellow birch. Owen checked the shelter register. Nolan's name was absent. No gear remained inside. 2 orange wands stood behind the shelter. The first carried 7 black bands. The second carried 6. Owen heard their reflective caps vibrating before he saw them. Whir, whir. Ben pulled the blue ribbon from the 6-band wand. I tied this below the marks. The ribbon was now above them. Snow began falling harder. It traveled sideways through the open shelter and collected against the back wall. Owen checked Ben's face. A pale patch had formed high on his left cheek. He covered it with a warm hand and made Ben eat half an energy bar. They had a stove and 1 emergency wrap between them, but the temperature was dropping. Base expected the wind to rise after dark. Owen keyed the radio. We have reached shelter number 3. Request position confirmation. The coordinator took several seconds to answer. Your tracker still shows the lower washout. Copy. We are physically at the shelter. Stay there. Team 3 is approaching from the south. Owen looked at the 2 wands. Negative. We have an environmental navigation problem. Shelter location may not be reliable. The radio remained quiet. Then the coordinator said, use the river. Owen and Ben descended from the shelter toward the sound beneath the ice. They tied a short rope between their harnesses. Owen led with the compass while Ben held his pack. The river should have been less than 100 yards away. They walked for half an hour. The sound stayed below them. At last, Owen saw a white opening between the trees. He heard ice grinding against rock and smelled the cold mineral dampness rising through cracks. Orange wands crossed the river from bank to bank. 12 stood on the ice. Their black bands decreased from 12 to 1, leading toward the opposite shore. Owen probed the nearest ice. The pole broke through after 1 push. Black water rolled beneath it. Ben stepped backward. The rope between them tightened. Owen turned. The rope ran from his harness around a spruce trunk. It returned from the other side and disappeared into the falling snow. Ben stood directly behind him. The rope was still attached to Ben's harness, but more than 30 feet of it lay between 2 men separated by 6 feet. Owen pulled. The line moved behind the tree without getting shorter. From every side came the buzz of reflective tape. Whir. Orange shafts rose through the snow among the spruces. 1 band, 2, 3. The order changed each time Owen shifted his head. Ben's breath came in short bursts. He held the rope with both hands, as if it were the only fixed object left. Owen cut it. The loose end snapped away from his harness and vanished around the trunk. He grabbed Ben's pack strap. Listen to the river. They turned away from the wands and followed the grinding under the ice. Owen kept one hand on Ben. With the other, he held the compass against his coat. The ground rose twice beneath them. The compass remained west. They kept going downhill anyway. Branches scraped their goggles. Snow filled the gaps around their collars. Ben stumbled, recovered, and stumbled again. Owen shortened his pace until they moved as one body. The wands continued behind them. Their plastic caps hummed each time the wind rose. Owen did not count them. Then another sound entered the trees. A whistle. 2 short notes. Search team signal. Owen answered with 2 blasts from his own whistle. Headlamps appeared below them. 3 members of Team 3 climbed through the snow with a rescue litter. One of them reached Owen and held his shoulder before asking any questions. They were on the Dry River Trail, less than half a mile from Route 302. The shelter was more than 5 miles upstream. Owen tried to explain where they had come from. His jaw shook too hard to hold the words together. Ben was treated for mild hypothermia and frost injury to his cheek. Owen had a rope burn across his harness where the cut line had pulled free. Nolan Reeves was not found that night. Search teams worked the drainage for 6 more days. No one found Nolan, the reflective tarp, or the rescue sled. They found one orange wand beside the lower washout. It carried 6 black bands. A piece of blue survey tape was tied above them. The official review attributed the team's route errors to heavy snowfall, poor global positioning reception, and early cold stress. The unauthorized wands were listed as unrelated trail debris. Owen's account of the rope was described as equipment confusion during reduced visibility. His tracker data could not be reconstructed into a continuous route. Owen returned to winter duty the following season. He no longer participates in searches along the Dry River. Each November, the Highway Department places orange fiberglass stakes along the roads near his house. Owen marks the edges of his own driveway with wooden poles cut to different lengths. Before every storm, he stands on the porch and counts them from the road to the garage. Then he counts them again in the other direction. Story 7. Dry leaves moved loudly in the Wakitas. They scraped over sandstone in small circles. Acorns struck the slope and rolled until they found a root. High in the shortleaf pines, wind passed through the needles with the steady rush of distant traffic. Ava Durant listened to those sounds while she locked the government truck near the old military road. It was early afternoon. Sunlight came from the west, low enough to place every pine shadow across the trail ahead of her. The shadows fell east in long, clean bars. Ava worked as a heritage resources technician for the Oklahoma Ranger District. Most of her field days involved locating old foundations, updating condition forms, and checking known sites after storms or road work. The work required restraint. If she found a ceramic fragment, she photographed it where it lay. If an old hearth appeared beneath a root ball, she covered it and recorded the location. Site coordinates stayed off public maps and out of ordinary email. That morning, a turkey hunter had reported fresh digging on a ridge below the Talamina Scenic Drive. The location matched a confidential archaeological site recorded years earlier during a timber survey. Ava had notified Forest Service law enforcement before leaving the district office. Officer Ray Dorsey was working a call near Broken Bow and could not reach her for several hours. "Document from the outside," he had told her. "Do not touch tools or footprints. If anybody comes back, walk away." She carried a camera, evidence scales, a folding north arrow, flagging, and a blank damage assessment. A field radio rode high on her shoulder. Her shovel stayed in the truck. The site lay less than a mile from the road. Reaching it took nearly an hour. The ridge ran east to west, like most of the folded mountains in that part of Oklahoma. Pine and post oak covered the crest. Below it, broken sandstone formed ledges hidden beneath leaves. Ava followed the confidential coordinates to a shallow bench above a spring drainage. She stopped before entering the recorded site boundary. Somewhere ahead, dry grit slid across stone. The sound lasted only a second. Then she saw the excavation. The pit was oval and about 4 feet long. Fresh orange soil covered the darker leaf litter around it. A severed root projected from one wall. The spoil pile had been screened, leaving pebbles and small pieces of sandstone in a neat fan downhill. No shovel remained. No person moved among the trees. Ava called Dorsey. "Confirmed unauthorized excavation," she said. "No suspect present. Photographs first. Keep your boots out of the spoil. Copy." She began with wide views from the cardinal directions. For each photograph, she placed the caseboard, metric scale, and folding north arrow beyond the disturbed soil. Then she stepped back and framed the pit with enough trees to relocate it later. The routine steadied her pace. Overview. Mid-range. Close detail. She photographed boot impressions near the western edge. One heel showed a diagonal cut in the tread. She found scrape marks where a shovel had struck sandstone and a crushed drink can beneath an oak. When Ava crouched to photograph the can, her boot pressed loose grit into the slope. It moved with a soft hiss. She finished the image and checked the display. A narrow shadow crossed the lower corner of the photograph. It began outside the frame and ended near her evidence scale. Ava looked behind her. There was no person there. The nearest sapling was too thin to cast a mark that wide. She checked the photograph again. The shadow might have belonged to her camera strap. She tucked the strap inside her vest and repeated the shot. The second image was clear. She continued documenting. At 2:30, Ava started a plan sketch. She chose a large pine outside the damage area as a temporary reference point and measured the pit with a fiberglass tape. The western sun warmed the back of her neck. Tree shadows stretched east across the bench. Something dark lay across the spoil pile. At first, Ava read it as another trunk shadow. Then she noticed its angle. Every other shadow pointed away from the sun. This one slanted north toward her. She stepped to the right. The dark line shifted over the orange soil. Its far end remained between two pines downhill. The near end moved until it touched the toe of her boot. Ava lifted her foot. The shadow stopped on the ground beneath it. Her own shadow lay behind her, short and unmistakable, with the camera case bulging from one hip. She now had two. Ava backed away from the excavation. The second shadow lengthened across roots and stones without breaking. Its edges were soft, but the center was darker than the pine shadows around it. Wind moved through the canopy. The long shadow did not move with any branch. She raised the camera and took 3 photographs. Through the viewfinder, the line looked like an ordinary patch of shade. When she lowered the camera, it ended at her left boot again. Her toes curled inside the leather. Ava turned toward the route back to the truck. Dry grit hissed behind her. She looked over one shoulder. Small stones were sliding from the spoil pile. They traveled north across level ground and stopped inside the shadow. Ava keyed her radio. "Dorsey, I am leaving the site." Static answered. She tried the district repeater and heard her own transmission return in broken pieces. The mountains could block a radio from one side of a ridge to the other. Ava had worked in worse dead zones. She packed the evidence scales without folding the north arrow. Her fingers pressed the release twice before the hinge closed. As she moved uphill, she kept the sun on her right shoulder. The road lay northwest. Orange flagging marked her entry route at wide intervals. The long shadow followed. It did not travel beside her like her own. It reached from tree to tree, changing its starting point whenever the terrain blocked her view. Its near end stayed angled toward her feet. At the first flag, Ava stopped. The fabric snapped in the wind. Pine shadows crossed the trail eastward. The other shadow came from the south. She took out her compass. The needle settled. Sun west, shadows east. The dark line ignored both. A branch cracked downhill. Ava turned her entire body rather than looking over one shoulder. No one stepped onto the trail. Nothing crossed between the trunks. The shadow was gone. She walked faster. For several minutes, she heard only her boots and the wind above them. The slope steepened toward the ridge. Loose leaves shifted under her heels. Then grit scraped over sandstone ahead. A long shadow crossed the trail. It pointed back toward Ava. There was no tree at its far end. The dark shape began beneath an open patch of sky and narrowed as it reached her. She stepped around it. The narrow end turned. Ava left the marked route and climbed directly toward the road. Greenbrier caught her pants. Sandstone rolled beneath her boots. She used both hands on the slope and did not stop to remove the thorns from her palms. The forest changed with the angle of the sun. Hollows darkened first. The ridge above remained yellow and open, less than 200 yards away. Ava focused on that strip of light. Her radio cracked. "Durant, confirm status." Dorsey's voice faded beneath static. Ava pressed the transmit button. "Returning to vehicle, no suspect observed." The response broke apart. "Return to your vehicle. I am 20 minutes out." Ava climbed another 20 yards and looked down at the radio. Its channel display had gone blank. The battery latch had opened against her pack strap. From the trees below came the short scrape of grit moving over rock. The shadow reached the heel of her boot. Cold passed through the sole, as if she had stepped into shallow water. Her calf tightened. For one moment her left foot would not rise. Ava pulled her leg forward with both hands. The boot came free of the dark line. She crawled across the sandstone ledge and stood in direct sunlight. Below her, the shadow continued uphill. It had no visible body at its end. Even so, the center had widened. Near the trees, it suggested shoulders, and a narrow head stretched flat across the slope. Ava did not photograph it again. She reached the ridge at 3:47. The truck was still a quarter-mile away, parked beyond a curve in the old military road. Sunlight flashed from its windshield through the pines. Ava walked toward it without using the flagging. She kept to the center of the old road, where the canopy opened and the afternoon light reached the ground. Tree shadows crossed her path from west to east. The long one came behind her. It touched each shadow and passed through without changing shape. Ava could hear grit sliding wherever it crossed exposed stone. The sound kept pace with her boots. At the final bend, she saw the truck. The driver's door faced west. Its metal side reflected a pale strip of sun. Ava took the keys from her vest. The gravel beneath the truck began to move. Hundreds of small grains drew across the road with a dry, steady hiss. They gathered beneath the driver's door. The long shadow entered the clearing. It did not stop at the edge of the trees. It crossed the road against the other shadows and reached Ava's feet. Her own shadow fell east. The second one climbed her boots. Ava's hands closed around the keys until the teeth marked her palm. She stepped into the truck, pulled the door shut, and started the engine. Darkness spread across the inside of the driver's window. Nothing stood outside it. The window turned black from the lower edge upward. The line reached the height of Ava's face. She put the truck in gear. Gravel struck the wheel wells as she accelerated along the ridge road. The blackness remained on the glass through the first curve. Then the truck entered full sunlight near an overlook. The window cleared. Ava drove to the visitor station without stopping. Dorsey met her there shortly after sunset. He checked the truck, her radio, and the photographs. The battery latch was undamaged, and the radio powered on immediately. He asked if she had seen a person. Only a shadow. Dorsey waited for more. Ava had none to give him. 2 officers returned to the site the following morning. They confirmed the illegal excavation and collected the drink can as evidence. The boot impressions had lost their edges overnight. No tools or additional tracks were found. The damage assessment became an investigation under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. No suspect was identified. The case remained open until the following spring, then moved to inactive status. Ava's photographs showed the pit, the scales, and the fresh spoil. They also showed a long shadow in 9 separate frames. The evidence summary described it as the photographer's shadow. Ava's own shadow was visible beside it in 6 of those images. A Choctaw Nation preservation specialist named June Battiest reviewed the site record during consultation. She studied the photographs without enlarging them. Her fingers stopped over the darkest frame. "There is an old name," she said, "Nalusa Falaya." Ava asked what the name meant. June closed the folder. "A name is not an answer. The looting pit was stabilized and covered. Its location remained confidential." Ava continued working in Heritage Resources, but she no longer documents damaged sites alone near the end of the day. Her field bag now contains a small brass compass that does not belong to Forest Service inventory. At home, she keeps it open on the west-facing windowsill. When afternoon light crosses the room, Ava checks that the raised lid casts only one shadow. Story 8. Before sunrise, the ponderosa forest made small wooden sounds. Cones dropped onto the roof of the Forest Service truck. Branches rubbed together above the parking area. From the entrance of Lava River Cave came a slow movement of cold air that stirred dust across the rocks. Samuel Ortiz set a microphone stand beside the entrance and connected it to the field recorder. "Station 0, he said. "Surface calibration. Samuel Ortiz." The recorder caught his voice, the pine branches, and one breath against the microphone windscreen. Samuel listened through his headphones. Everything sounded ordinary. He worked as a cave resource specialist for the Flagstaff Ranger District. His mornings often began by counting helmets, checking backup lights, and reminding researchers that a public cave was still a protected geologic resource. Nothing went underground until it had been cleaned. Samuel brushed dirt from equipment cases and sprayed boot soles with disinfectant. He checked the oxygen meter, entered both names on the trip log, and sealed a spare headlamp inside his coveralls. His partner that day was Kira Benson, a seasonal cave technician with a geology degree and a habit of labeling every cable twice. "Primary light?" Samuel asked. Kira switched it on. "Backup," she showed him too. "Food? More than you brought." Samuel accepted that answer. They were testing a portable acoustic mapping system on the mile-long lava tube. A calibrated speaker sent a rising tone through the cave. 4 matched microphones recorded the returning sound. Software used the delays between those returns to estimate the shape of spaces beyond normal sight. The system was experimental. Basalt did not behave like a smooth room. Frozen ripples scattered sound along the floor. Cracks carried vibration through rock. A passage could appear wider or longer in the data simply because one frequency traveled better than another. Samuel trusted the raw recordings more than the finished maps. The previous afternoon, he and Kira had placed the microphone array at several stations and left the final unit running overnight. It sat near a side passage blocked by an old basalt collapse. Earlier surveys suggested the branch continued beyond the rocks, but no one had entered it. The collapse was treated as a wall. A surface ranger closed the entrance to visitors while the team worked. Samuel and Kira descended over the broken rock at 7:20. The outside light narrowed above them. Cold settled through Samuel's gloves and into the metal clips on his pack. The cave remained between the mid-30s and mid-40s through most of the year, even when summer heated the forest outside. Their lamps revealed a floor shaped by moving lava. Low ridges curled through the basalt like waves stopped in place. Stone drips hung from sections of ceiling where heat had softened the rock after the tube began to harden. They moved without rushing. Samuel checked old graffiti removal areas and noted fresh litter near the main route. Kira measured wall temperature at each station. Every few minutes they turned off their lights and waited. No visitors. No loose rock, only water dripping somewhere beyond the beams. At the third station, Samuel fired the acoustic sweep. The speaker began with a low vibration felt through the knees. The tone climbed until it became a thin whistle, then passed above hearing. Echoes traveled down the tube and returned in layers. Kira watched the levels. Clean run. They advanced. The blocked branch lay near a broad section where the ceiling lowered and the main tube bent east. A pile of angular basalt filled the side opening from floor to roof. White survey marks placed months earlier showed no movement. The overnight recorder stood 10 feet from the collapse. Samuel checked its seals. No moisture, no impact marks. The memory indicator showed more than 12 hours of data. Kira connected the recorder to the field computer while Samuel measured the air at the rock face. Oxygen was normal. Temperature remained steady. "You should hear this," Kira said. She had opened a waveform from early that morning. Samuel put on the headphones. At first, the file contained the low room tone of the cave. Air moved through the main tube. A drop of water struck rock near the left microphone. Then someone inhaled. The breath was close and unhurried. It entered through the microphone, facing the blocked branch. A second breath followed. "Samuel." The voice was quiet. One word. Samuel removed the headphones. "What time?" Kira pointed to the file stamp. 5:14. More than 2 hours before Samuel and Kira had signed the entry log. The surface ranger had arrived after 6. No visitor vehicle had been in the parking area. Kira listened again through one side of the headphones. "Could be yesterday's buffer. That station was formatted before we left." Clock drift then. Samuel checked the other microphone channels. The breath reached the microphone nearest the collapse first. Fractions of a second later, it reached the other 3. The software placed the source behind the rocks. He replayed the word. "Samuel." The voice did not sound like Kira. It did not sound like the surface ranger. It was too soft to compare reliably with his own. Samuel saved a copy and disconnected the overnight unit. They could have ended the survey there. Instead, he set the microphones around the collapse for another active sweep. The branch had produced an unexplained sound. Their work was to measure unexplained spaces. Kira placed the speaker 15 feet back in the main tube. Samuel checked each microphone with a finger snap and marked its position on the sketch. When he snapped near the rock face, the sound returned twice. The first echo was immediate. The second came after a pause. It was faint. The delay suggested open space beyond the collapse. Kira heard it too. "Long void," she said. Samuel measured again. The map distance extended farther than the width of the ridge above them. The branch could have curved. It could have dropped beneath the main tube. The software drew it as a straight corridor. Samuel deleted the model and started over with lower speaker output. The new sweep rolled through the cave. Halfway up the frequency range, the microphones registered a pulse from behind the collapse. It was not an echo of the test signal. It rose and fell below the speaker tone. Samuel isolated the channel, breathing. He looked at Kira. She stood beside the speaker with both hands visible. The sound continued. Inhale, exhale. Samuel held his breath. The recording took another. His tongue pressed against the back of his teeth. He could feel his pulse moving beneath the chin strap. "Turn it off," Kira said. Samuel stopped the sweep. The breathing ended. They waited with their lights pointed at the rocks. Fine dust drifted from a gap near the top of the collapse. Kira checked the survey marks. None had shifted. "Temperature contraction," she said. The cave was cold enough to tighten muscles through 2 layers. The rock had been at nearly the same temperature for centuries. Samuel moved the nearest microphone 6 feet to the right. If the source was airflow through a crack, its direction should change. He ran a passive test. Nothing appeared for 3 minutes. Then a low pressure wave passed through the chamber. Samuel felt it in his ears before he heard it. The sensation was like descending quickly in an airplane. Kira swallowed and touched one side of her helmet. From the blocked branch came a slow exhale. Dust lifted from the rock face and moved toward them. The oxygen meter remained normal. There was no detectable airflow against Samuel's damp finger. The live monitor showed a repeating pulse. Each cycle lasted almost as long as a resting human breath. Samuel raised the headphones. Kira caught the cable. "We have enough," he agreed, but he put one side over his left ear anyway. The branch breathed once. Then the voice said his name. Samuel stepped closer to the collapse. The voice came again. It was clearer through the live channel than it had been in the overnight file. "Samuel." He touched the uppermost stable block with the back of his glove. Cold moved through the fabric. Behind him, Kira began packing the speaker. Samuel leaned toward a narrow seam between 2 rocks. His headlamp illuminated only dust and black basalt. The seam was not wide enough for his hand. Inside the headphones, the breathing matched his own. He inhaled, it inhaled. He exhaled, it exhaled. Samuel stopped. The sound completed the breath without him. He removed the headphones, but the breathing remained in his left ear. For the next minute, he could not tell whether it came from the rock or from inside his head. He pressed a finger beneath his nose. Air moved across it. The sound near the collapse followed half a beat later. Samuel took 1 step back. It followed sooner. He walked to the center of the main tube. The delay disappeared. Every breath now arrived twice, one against his finger, one inside the rock. Kira called his name. Samuel did not answer. He was watching the seam. It seemed wider. He knew that could be caused by his lamp angle. He moved the beam to the side. The opening remained a vertical strip no wider than 2 fingers. Cold air touched his cheek. "There was no gap," Kira said. Samuel crouched. The headphones hanging from his neck produced a soft burst of static. Then the voice spoke through both earpieces. "Samuel." Loose basalt shifted inside the collapse. The first sound was a scrape. Then several rocks settled against one another with heavy, measured pressure. Dust rolled across the floor. Kira pulled Samuel by the back of his harness. The seam opened another inch. Beyond it was no visible wall. Samuel's headlamp entered the gap and did not return from anything he could see. The mapping speaker turned on. Neither of them was near its controls. A low tone filled the chamber. The collapse answered with one long breath. Kira tore the power cable from the speaker. The tone stopped, but the pressure behind the rocks continued to rise. Samuel's ears closed. His balance shifted toward the blocked passage. Another block moved. Kira dragged him behind the bend in the main tube. Samuel recovered his footing and helped carry the equipment case. They left the microphone stands where they were. The pressure followed them for 2 stations. Each time Samuel breathed, the cave returned it. At the entrance slope, sunlight appeared between the rocks. The surface ranger was calling down to them. His ordinary voice broke apart against the uneven walls. Samuel climbed until warm air touched his face. Only then did the second breathing stop. The cave was closed for a geologic inspection. A team entered the next morning and found the collapse unchanged. Every white survey mark remained aligned. They reported no new seam and no fallen material. The abandoned microphone stands were still upright. The acoustic files went through technical review. The overnight timestamp was attributed to clock drift. The spoken name was classified as buffer contamination from Samuel's surface calibration. No one explained why the sound had reached the branch microphone first. The final mapping run produced a void extending nearly half a mile beyond the known tube. Reviewers rejected it as a reflection error caused by irregular basalt. The branch remained closed because of rockfall risk. Samuel returned to work after 3 weeks. He shifted most of his duties to surface inspections, cave climate records, and visitor impact reports. He still reviews acoustic data when the district requests it. He no longer wears headphones over both ears. During every recording, Samuel keeps one finger beneath his nose until each breath in the file matches the air moving across his skin. Story 9. After dark, a prescribed fire spoke in smaller voices. Flames no longer moved through the grass. The loud work had ended hours earlier. What remained were the soft collapses of burned pine cones, the hiss of water on hot roots, and an occasional pop from resin sealed inside a stump. Naomi Reed listened for those sounds while she checked the edge of the burn with a thermal camera. On the screen, the forest had become shades of gray. Cold sandstone showed black. Warm tree trunks rose in pale columns. Buried heat appeared white beneath soil that looked dead to the eye. Naomi worked as a prescribed fire technician on the Kisatchie Ranger District. She trusted her hand tools, but she liked the camera. A glowing root could carry fire beneath a control line and surface after the crew had moved on. The camera found what smoke concealed. That morning, the burn boss had read the weather, objectives, and contingency plan beside the engines. Naomi wrote the relative humidity and wind direction on a card taped inside her helmet. The unit covered several hundred acres of longleaf pine near the western side of the wilderness. Its sandstone ridges were steep by Louisiana standards. Narrow draws held smoke after sunset and turned radio voices into broken whispers. Ignition had begun after noon. By dusk, the firing crews were off the line. Naomi's 6-person holding crew remained to cold trail the boundary and mop up hot material near it. Crew boss Mason Pike assigned each person a strip. They worked abreast with one foot in the black. Lucien Boudreau carried a Pulaski. Claire Webb used a council rake to pull apart burning roots. Omar Velez and Evan Bell carried backpack pumps. Naomi scanned ahead and marked heat with the toe of her boot. At the engine, Lucien had rinsed one glove after grabbing a soot-covered hose. He held it near Naomi's face. "Smell that." The wet leather carried the sour odor of a dog that had slept in rain. Naomi pushed his hand away. "Put it on before you lose it." That smell stayed at the engine when they entered the burn. By 9, the crew had worked half a mile along the control line. Wind moved from southwest to northeast. Smoke followed it through the pines in thin blue layers. Mason called for a weather reading. Naomi measured temperature, humidity, and wind. She repeated the numbers over the radio, then entered them on her card. "No change," Mason said. "Continue grid." They moved into the black. Naomi swept the thermal camera from left to right. 6 pale bodies stood at even intervals. Beyond them, stump holes glowed beneath gray ash. She lowered the camera and smelled wet dog. The odor came from the northeast. Naomi looked at the smoke. It was moving northeast, away from the crew. The smell traveled through it in the opposite direction. Lucien stood 20 feet to her left. "Your glove still wet?" He struck it against his pants. "Dry." The odor passed Naomi and reached Claire. Claire turned her head and rubbed her nose against one shoulder. "Y'all smell that?" Mason stopped the grid. They listened. Something scratched once in the leaves beyond the burned strip. Then a hot pine knot broke apart with a sharp snap. No animal appeared. Mason swept his headlamp along the unburned side of the line. The beam passed through wiregrass, young pines, and exposed sandstone. "Probably a hog," he said. They resumed work. The smell faded. At 9:30, Evan's backpack pump began leaking around the cap. Water ran down his shirt and darkened the back of his yellow fire-resistant shirt. Mason sent him to the engine for a replacement gasket. The others remained in their assigned strips. Evan's strip stayed open between Lucien and Claire. It was only 10 feet wide, and he was expected back within 15 minutes. Naomi scanned the grid. Mason, Omar, Claire. An upright heat signature stood in Evan's empty strip. Lucien waited beyond it with his Pulaski on one shoulder. Naomi counted again. There were 6 pale figures on the screen. Only 5 people remained on the line. Naomi lowered the camera. The space between Claire and Lucien was empty. Smoke drifted through it close to the ground. She raised the camera. The figure had not moved. Its head was level with Lucien's. Its shoulders were narrower than Mason's. Both arms hung lower than the crew's tools and gloves should have allowed. The heat was even from head to foot. No cooler helmet. No warmer face. Naomi wiped the lens with her sleeve. The figure remained. "Hold," she said. Mason answered from the far end. "What do you have?" Naomi kept the camera raised. Unidentified heat source in the grid. Lucien turned toward Evan's empty strip. On the screen, the figure stood 3 feet from him. "I don't see anything," he said. The wet dog odor returned. It reached Naomi from the northeast, moving against the wind. Her mouth filled with the taste of old metal. She breathed through her sleeve. Mason ordered everyone to close on Claire. The crew stepped inward. The heat signature stepped with them. Naomi did not see its legs move. One frame showed it in Evan's strip. The next placed it 5 feet closer to Claire. The ground beneath it was cool. Mason walked into the empty space with his headlamp held low. His boot prints pressed clean marks into the ash. He checked behind the nearest pine and probed a stump hole. Nothing rose on the thermal screen except Mason. The 6th figure was gone. "Camera bloom," Mason said. "Hot gas can ghost an image." Naomi had seen bloom around flame fronts and heated metal. It smeared edges. It did not stand in a crew position. She said nothing. They waited for Evan to return. His radio call arrived from the engine. "Pump repaired." Coming back to the line, Mason acknowledged him and restarted the grid. This time the crew closed Evan's strip. Lucien moved beside Claire. Naomi scanned again. 5 signatures. The wet dog smell remained near the unburned side. It moved parallel to them. Whenever the crew advanced, the odor advanced. When Mason stopped them to dig a route, it stopped. Smoke continued northeast, but the smell held its place beside Naomi's shoulder. Lucien leaned close without looking at her. "My grandmother had a word for that. Not now." He pressed his lips together. They reached a shallow draw where smoke pooled beneath the trees. The thermal camera showed hot roots crossing under the line. Naomi marked 3 spots, and the crew dug them out to mineral soil. Water struck the exposed heat. Steam rose. Through it came the wet dog smell, stronger than before. Naomi's eyes watered. Her gloves tightened around the camera. The 6th signature returned inside the steam. It stood at the outside edge of the crew, exactly 1 person beyond Naomi. The formation had no assigned strip there. She turned the camera. The figure stayed beside her. Naomi stepped forward. It moved forward. She stepped back. It remained in line with the others. Mason saw her stop. "Read, it is back." He ordered another crew count. Each person answered by name: Mason, Naomi, Lucien, Claire, Omar. Evan answered from somewhere uphill. "I have your lights." 30 yards out. On the screen, the extra figure turned its head toward Evan's voice. Naomi lowered the camera. Nothing stood beside her. Evan's headlamp appeared through the smoke. He descended the slope with a repaired backpack pump. Naomi raised the camera. 7 heat signatures now occupied the draw. 6 wore helmets and carried tools. The 7th stood between Naomi and Evan. The smell pressed into the back of her throat. Lucien counted the figures on the camera display. He spoke the word quietly. "Rougarou." Mason heard him. "Enough." A deep wooden split came from above the crew. Everyone looked uphill. A longleaf pine had burned through one side of its base. Its crown shifted against the stars. Snag! Mason pointed toward the black. The crew moved together. Boots struck ash and sandstone. The tree began falling across the draw with branches tearing through the pines around it. Naomi kept the camera against her chest and followed Lucien toward the safety area. The wet dog smell passed them. It traveled uphill into the wind. The pine hit the ground behind the crew. Heat rolled across Naomi's back. Burning limbs scattered over the place where they had been standing. Mason counted again. All 6 answered. Naomi lifted the camera. The fallen crown glowed white. Crew members stood beyond it in a loose half-circle. The 7th signature remained on the other side of the trunk. It stood in Evan's former place in the grid. The shape bent at the waist. Its arms reached the ground. For several seconds, it rested on 4 points. Then it straightened. No ash moved beneath it. The camera measured its surface near human body temperature. Naomi changed the range. The figure became brighter while the burning branches around it dimmed. It took 1 step through the fallen crown. Flames did not bend around its legs. Naomi backed away. The odor reached her first. Wet fur, mud. A closed room after rain. The heat signature crossed the trunk. Lucien caught Naomi by the pack strap. Do not leave it a spot. He pulled her into the crew's half-circle. Claire and Omar closed from the other side until no gap remained between them. Naomi looked at the screen. 6 human shapes stood shoulder to shoulder. The other heat signature stopped beyond the fire. Wind pushed smoke over it. When the smoke cleared, the figure was gone. Mason ended the night grid. The crew returned to the control line as one group. No one went back alone for tools. They left the fallen snag and 2 backpack pumps for the morning shift. At the engine, Naomi downloaded the thermal recording before the camera battery could fail. Mason watched the entire file beside her. The extra signature appeared for 11 minutes. It occupied Evan's empty strip during the first sequence. Later, it stood at the open edge beside Naomi. In the final frames, it remained visible beyond the fallen pine. The burn report documented the snag, the interrupted mop-up operation, and a possible large animal near the crew. The thermal image was classified as a combination of residual heat, smoke interference, and sensor lag. No tracks were found in the ash the next morning. The fire remained inside the prescribed boundary. The unit was declared secure after another day of patrol. Lucien never explained the word he had used. When Naomi asked once, he shook his head. You smelled it, he said. That is enough. Naomi stayed in prescribed fire. She became a crew boss several seasons later and still carries a thermal camera on night operations. Her briefing contains one instruction that is not written in any field guide. When a firefighter leaves the grid, Naomi steps sideways and closes the empty place before she raises the camera. Story 10. The rainforest never gave Elena Soto a clean recording. Water moved under everything. It tapped broad leaves, ran through root channels, and fell from the canopy long after the clouds had passed. Insects filled the higher frequencies. Coquilles called from bromeliads, palm litter, road cuts, and places no person could reach without tearing the hillside apart. Elena liked the overlap. A healthy forest was supposed to sound crowded. That Tuesday, she was servicing a recorder on the western side of the El Toro watershed. The unit was strapped to a Tabanuco trunk at shoulder height, inside a gray weatherproof housing. She opened it beneath a plastic field cover, checked the gasket for grit, and replaced the silica packet beside the battery tray. Then she compared the internal clock with her satellite receiver. The recorder had gained 11 seconds in 3 weeks. She wrote the drift in a waterproof notebook, followed by the station code, air temperature, relative humidity, canopy condition, and the distance to flowing water. Before closing the housing, she held a calibration tone 1 arm's length from the microphone. One coquille called from somewhere near her left boot. The first note was low. The second rose cleanly, then cut off halfway through. After a short pause, the frog repeated the same broken call. Elena smiled and wrote, clipped second note, close range. Her field partner, Mateo Rivera, waited lower on the slope with a coil of replacement cable over one shoulder. He worked for the watershed team and could judge recent rainfall by the color of a stream. At each crossing, he studied the foam caught against rocks before stepping in. "We need to be out before 4, he said. Elena looked through the canopy. The sky above it was pale and flat. "Forecast says later." The rain does not read the forecast. They finished the station and descended. By the time they reached the service road, the first drops were striking the leaves. Each one made a separate sound overhead. Within minutes, those sounds joined into a steady rush. The storm remained over the mountains through the night. Elena listened from the research quarters as rain hammered the metal awning and overflowed the gutters. Near midnight, the watershed alarm sent a high water notification. A second alert followed before she had finished reading the first. One gauge rose so quickly that the line on the screen looked vertical. By morning, access to the upper trail was closed. The flood tore soil from the stream banks and left branches wedged above head height. It rolled stones across the road. One footbridge shifted off its foundations, and a culvert below the research plots filled with roots, leaves, and brown water. Elena's recorder network had 8 stations spread across separate tributaries and elevations. None transmitted data. Each unit stored its files on its own memory card, which meant she could not check the damage from the office. They waited 2 days for the water to drop. On Friday morning, Elena and Matteo entered from the lower trail, with hard hats, throw bags, spare batteries, and enough food to remain out after dark if a crossing delayed them. The air smelled of split vegetation and wet clay. Water still came down every slope, often where no channel had existed before. The first recorder was hanging crooked. Its lower strap had snapped, but the housing remained sealed. Elena photographed it in place, called out the station code, and removed the memory card with dry gloves. She slid the card into a numbered envelope and marked the seal. At lunch, they stopped beneath a palm where the ground was less saturated. Elena used a field tablet to check whether the files were readable. The final recording opened. Rain filled the headphones. Beneath it came a normal evening chorus, dozens of male coquilles calling at different distances. One close frog gave a low first note and a rising second note that stopped halfway. Elena listened for another minute. The same chorus returned. Not a similar pattern. The same pattern. The same near call. The same 3 drops striking the microphone housing. The same insect rasp beginning behind the second note. The segment lasted 17 seconds. Then it started again. She removed the headphones and checked the file duration. More than 6 hours had been recorded. The waveform repeated in even blocks from the moment the flood reached the station until the battery failed. Water inside the housing could have disrupted the recorder's memory buffer. Elena had seen damaged audio repeat before. She noted probable flood corruption, shut down the tablet, and packed the card away. At the second station, the recorder was dry. It stood farther upslope and across another tributary. The flood had not touched its housing. Its straps were tight, its clock showed a different drift, and the desiccant inside was still blue. That card contained the same 17 seconds. Elena placed both recordings on the screen. Their waveforms matched from beginning to end. She enlarged the spectrogram until individual raindrops appeared as thin vertical marks. Every mark was identical. Matteo crouched beside her. Water moved through the rocks below them with a heavy grinding sound. Could you have copied the file twice? The cards have not left their envelopes. Same model, different production years. She played the segment through the tablet speaker. The clipped coquille note sounded smaller there, almost harmless. Near the end of the loop, something moved below the chorus. It was too low to be a frog and too regular to be water. Elena put the headphones back on and raised the gain. A voice was speaking. Most of the words were buried. She separated the lower frequencies and played the segment again. The voice became thin and close, as if the speaker's mouth had been inches from the microphone. Station 4. Lower strap gone. Housing rotated downstream. One battery compartment dry. Matteo leaned toward the screen. That sounds like you. Elena replayed it. Her voice had a slight rasp after long days in the field. The recording had it too. It also had her habit of pausing after the station number. She had not visited Station 4. They were standing at Station 2. Elena checked her notebook. No entry matched the words. She checked the tablet for cached voice memos, though she never dictated notes in the field. There were none. She sealed the card again. "We go to 4, she said. Station 3 had been pulled from its tree and caught in a root mass below the trail. Its microphone cover was packed with silt. Elena did not open it. They continued toward Station 4. The new route followed a slope of exposed roots. Each step released a little water from the soil. Elena kept one hand against the trees, while Mateo tested the ground ahead with a trekking pole. Before they saw the recorder, they heard its loose housing knock against the trunk. The lower strap was gone. The box had rotated downstream. When Elena opened it, water had entered the left side of the battery tray. The compartment on the right remained dry. Neither of them spoke. Elena documented the damage. She used the same order she always used: station code, housing position, strap condition, battery compartment. When she finished, she looked down at the page. The sentences were not identical to the recording. They were close enough that her thumb remained pressed against the paper until the nail lost color. At Station 5, the card held the same loop. This time the voice beneath the frog said, "Yellow notebook dropped beside the northern crossing, retrieved with water damage." Elena put her notebook in the zippered pocket of her vest. The northern crossing was half a mile ahead. They reached it near mid-afternoon. The old channel had widened, leaving a strip of mud beneath a tangle of fallen branches. Mateo crossed first and turned to watch her. Elena planted her pole, stepped over a root, and felt the bank collapse under her heel. She caught a branch with both hands. Her vest struck the mud. The notebook slid from its pocket and landed at the edge of the current. Mateo grabbed the shoulder strap of her pack. Elena recovered her footing, then snatched the notebook before the water carried it under the branches. Brown water had entered through a split near the binding. Mateo looked at the notebook, then back toward the trail. "We have enough cards." Elena wiped mud from the cover. One station left. Station 8 stood near the head of a narrow drainage below El Toro Peak. The recorder there was the highest in the network and the farthest from the flooded lower channels. If its card contained clean audio, it might show when the corruption began. They reached Station 7 as daylight was thinning under the canopy. The recorder worked normally until the hour of the flood. Then the 17-second chorus began. The clipped second note, the 3 drops, the insect rasp, and Elena's voice. Station 8 not recovered. Water rising behind us. Mateo on the north bank. The loop ended. Elena played it again. Her breathing had gone shallow enough to fog the lower edge of the tablet screen. Mateo stood with his head turned uphill. "Do you hear that?" At first Elena heard only runoff, then a coqui called nearby. One low note, one rising note, cut in half. Another answered farther up the drainage. Then another called to the east. The chorus assembled in the same order as the recording, each voice entering at the same interval. 3 drops struck the recorder housing. An insect rast began. 17 seconds later, the forest started over. Mateo took the throw bag from his pack and clipped it to his belt. They left Station 7 open and moved uphill. The first sound of the new flood was not water. It was stone turning against stone somewhere beyond the ridge. The grinding traveled through the ground and into Elena's boots. They crossed the drainage before the water arrived. Mateo reached the north bank. Elena was still in the channel when a branch snapped upstream. She climbed the opposite side on her hands, drove one knee into the mud, and caught a root. The root tore loose. Mateo threw the rope. The bag struck beside her arm. Elena wrapped the line around her wrist, and he pulled until she reached the bank. Brown water filled the channel seconds later. It carried leaves, pale roots, and the gray housing from Station 8. The recorder turned once in the current and vanished beneath a log. From somewhere across the water, the coqui chorus completed its 17 seconds. Then it began again. They spent the night on higher ground beneath an emergency tarp. The rain was light there. Neither opened another recording. The official hydrology report described the second rise as the release of a temporary debris dam. The timing matched the rainfall gauges. The damaged crossings and displaced equipment were entered into the normal incident system. Elena's audio received a separate technical review. All 7 recovered cards contained the identical chorus. The files began at different clock times, but the raw samples matched exactly, including microphone noise. The recorders had no wireless hardware. They had never been connected to one another. The manufacturer found no mechanism that could place one unit's audio onto another unit's card. The review classified the event as probable duplication during data handling. The voice was labeled inadvertent researcher contamination. The affected period was removed from the study, and the remaining recordings were accepted. Elena requested that the original cards be preserved. 6 months later, she listened to them in a soundproof room. The chorus still repeated. Her recorded field notes still described conditions she had not documented until after hearing them. There was one change. On every card, beneath the final loop, her voice began another sentence. Station 9. The network had never had a Station 9. Elena still works with autonomous recorders. She still enters the rainforest after storms, checks every gasket, and measures every clock drift. But she no longer dictates anything near an active microphone. Before Elena writes the first word of a field note, she plays the final minute of every card and listens for her own voice to begin first.